Good morning, everyone. How are we today? So ready for another webinar? So I do know some of you would be watching the replay. That's all good. Like I said, if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them on and I'm happy to reply. So let me share my screen. I'm hoping you can see my screen. Let's go full screen. Okay. Let's do that. Webinar. What are we talking today? We are talking about the principles of design. Now, okay, before that, let me introduce myself, something about me. I am Latika Nair, the founder and owner director of Latika Nair Design. I have completed my architecture from India in 2002. Since then, I've been working as a registered architect both in India and Middle East before I moved to Melbourne. I shifted to Melbourne in 2010. I did work with a couple of architects and interior designers and decided to specialize in interiors. And I wanted to help as many homeowners as possible with their dream interior. And that is how Latika Nair Design was born. Okay, as we all know, or good to know, what is interior design? Interior design is art and science of enhancing the interior of a building to achieve a healthier and more aesthetically pleasing environment for the people using it. Now, it is not, that clearly shows when you talk about interior design, it's not about everything just looking pretty and looking beautiful. There is a science behind it. You need to understand, the space has to be functional. So there is a science involved in it. And that is why it is mentioned as the art and science of understanding a space to create both functional space and, of course, aesthetically pleasing. For whom? For the people living in the space. So sometimes I talk to clients and I say, you don't have to be caught up in the trends and things like that. It's what works for you in the space. It has to be functional. You're not setting up a route just for it to look good in a photo. It is a functional space which needs to be used. So you have to make sure that aspect is given importance. Now, what are the principles of design? Last week, we discussed about elements of design, which are known as the building blocks. So those are the terms you had to be aware of on which you need to create. Today, we're talking about the principles of design, and they're usually called the tools. This is what helps us to create what we want to achieve. Like I said, both functional and aesthetically pleasing. There are 5 design principles, namely balance, rhythm and repetition, emphasis, proportion and scale, and harmony. Now, let's start with balance. Now, when you walk into a space, you know, everything looks balanced. It looks at peace. Even you are at peace when you see a space. What does that mean? That there's careful consideration of all the objects placed within a space. So it gives you a sense of stability, equilibrium. You don't feel like something it's out of space and it looks off center. It's actually, it talks about the psychology. It's what you feel. The space looks balanced. So when we have discussed space, we mentioned space involves light, structure, the actual space, the windows, the ceiling, the floor, and the view. Everything involves when we're talking of the space. And also the other elements, color, shape, and of course, the things we talk about later, the principles also come into being when you want to achieve a balance. Now, to dictate balance, there are 2 main type of balance. One is a formal balance, which means it's exactly mirror image. You would have seen many buildings when they're built, even when you look at the outside. If you have a center line, the left side looks exactly like the right side. So they are the mirror images of each other. So that gives you a sense of formality and precision. So everything on the left is equal to everything on the right. Balance could be even the other way. So if you've got one mirror, everything on the top is equal to everything at the bottom. So balance can be where they are like mirror image. And informal balance is when items are placed more casually and you The balance is obtained by, the visual effect of more the left side and the right side looking in balance in terms of weight. So it's the weight that, you feel when you look. It doesn't have to literally be that the items are heavier than the other, but it's the weight of the items. When you see the left side and the right side, one doesn't look, heavier than the other. So if you have them on, if you consider them, they don't look that way. So when it's balanced, you would feel they look in line, they look proportioned, they look correct. So that is what informal balance is about. You can see this image is clearly describes it. The first one up there, center axis, left and right is exactly the same. They've got the speakers arranged same, they've got the plants arranged in the same manner, and the couch in the same manner. While the second one, you can see we've got a treatment of a wall happening on the left side, and that has been balanced because that runs actually, it's a bigger photo, it actually runs a bit more on a double height. So that vision is balanced with a mirror and a seating on the right side. So they look balanced. They're not exactly the same, but they look balanced to the eye in terms of the weight you give both, the weightage you give both. So that is balance, which is the first design principle. Now, rhythm and repetition. Now, we all know what is repetition, when you repeat an object. And rhythm gives you, by repeating an object in a particular manner, that gives you a rhythm. It's just like music. You've got rhythm to the music, rhythm to the way you walk, you talk. Everything has a rhythm. There's a repetition. So repetition could be anything. It could be line, the form, the color, the texture. You could have anything in a repeating manner, which creates a rhythm in a space. What does the rhythm do? It helps your eye to move from one point to another in a very relaxed way. You're not, creating conflict. It moves gradually from one to another in a pleasing, choreographed way, if you can call it. It's just like a dance movement. Everything, when it falls into rhythm, it looks so beautiful. Just like that, a space which has a beautiful rhythm will feel nice and beautiful, pleasing to your eye. Now, this is always dependent on what is the end result you want. You can, depending on what feeling you want to create in the room, you can create your rhythm accordingly. So, and repetition also, it creates a visual link between a space. So that is another way that you can add a rhythm and then add a component, repeat it so that it blends the whole space together. Now, in this one, you can clearly see there is a rhythm created by actually having the repetition of the color teal. Now, you can see we had this formal couch, which is a warm color, and they had the cushions all in a similar tone. So they just kind of blended in and there was nothing, everything just looked plain. We brought in a little bit of teal. We added a teal highlight, one armchair across the room on the corner, which is like a corner reading chair. And we've repeated the teal, you can see, in the other cushions. So there is plain and textured to bring in a little bit of drama. And we have a lampshade at the corner as well. So it is balanced. You're balancing it visually too, if you can see. So there's repetition, there's a rhythm and balance. You can see in any given space, all these principles actually overlap, and it's how they work together to create that effect. You can look at one item at a time, but then when you place them together, how they work together and getting them aligned. So that is why understanding principles of design is the key, because you need to understand these terms so that you are able to create what you like. Repetition. Now this photo, very clear. Can you see what is repeated? Yes, it's the color that we have repeated, the color blue. It's a plain room. The wall and ceiling is white. They've got a hardwood flooring. We introduced color. We had the wallpaper, and actually it's not a wallpaper, it's a grass paper. So that's actually got the color and texture as well. And the same thing, instead of having large pieces of the same color, we just took the color from there and added it in the bedding. And of course, the highlight chair, that's a reading chair in the room. That was a requirement. We needed a reading chair in the room. We brought in the pop of color with the chair. Now you can see the bedding is not entirely blue. It's got textures of white, blue, gray, but it's just got the blue highlights. And even in the decorations that we've used on the side, it does have blue in it. And that's a bit more textured because the wall was plain. We could play around with a little more texture in the bedding and the accessories that we had. So that is a clear indication of repetition of color in here. Next, we come to the principle, which is emphasis. Now, what is an emphasis? It is creating a focal point or a focal area. It can be however you want to create. You can have it as part of the build that is already there, or you can create it with some element, and then you can have everything else flowing to complement this focus. So you cannot have a couple of focuses in the same area. It has to blend and highlight to one so that one remains a focal point, because it's only then when we talk about the rhythm as well. You have a focus and then your eye moves along in a choreographed manner, pleasing. You can't have too many things popping out because they will all become focus, and then there is fight happening within the space. And that's why sometimes you see when you overdo something, you need to stop at a certain point, because sometimes you think you're doing fine, but that may be the only reason. You might be overdoing it a little bit. So what happens is, even just by, your cushions or something, maybe even if you just pull a couple of things out, it might just look beautiful to your space, because you probably have an emphasis and everything else you want to complement so that this remains the emphasis all the time. Your eye is attracted towards it. Usually we do know fireplace, or it's a view that becomes an emphasis. Artwork can be an emphasis. Living area, usually it's the TV area side that becomes the emphasis, because that's where your tele unit is, sometimes your fireplace, you've got your feature wall. So that whole area is your emphasis, and everything else works to complement the space. Now, what happens if you don't have emphasis? Now, you have to have something like a focus in a room, because otherwise the room just looks monotonous, because everything just flows and there's nothing that your eye just picks on and sees it as a wow factor, you can call it as well. Now this one, it's the same living room that I showed before, but I'm showing you another angle where you can see where we've created the emphasis. So it is the tele unit. And of course, it's a double height wall. It's got a window on top. So we had to highlight it because there will be the couch and everybody is facing, looking towards that side. So we created that as an emphasis. We made it a large double height paneled area, and the television is in the center. So to be honest, the television is not standing out as much because that is black as well. It just stays along along with the black paneling. So it just gels, and that as a whole becomes an emphasis. You've got a black tele unit as well. So you can see that whole thing acts as one piece and it's one emphasis. And from that, you've got the movement of all the furniture pieces and everything around that space. I really hope you guys are understanding. Like I said, when you watch a replay, if you've got any questions, please feel free to DM me or comment, and I'm happy to chat more about it. I want to just make it as easy for you to understand so that you are able to create your space like the way you're planning. Now, proportion and scale. And this can be a little confusing at times, what we talk about proportion and scale. Sometimes people use these two terms in a way that they mean the same, but they do not mean the same. They are two distinct meanings. So proportion is not dependent on a particular site. You're always talking in proportion to something. So usually in residential, in your normal commercial as well, a human figure is taken as a reference and everything is proportioned to the human figure. So easily you can say, everything will be aligned. So that's why we've got standard measurements we have for certain areas, because that's the height human works on. So it is in proportion. So the doors are proportionate to the human height, the windows, your room spaces is all proportionate. Now, when you usually go to a larger, grander space, say, for example, you're considering a palace or something, that also, though the human is the thing, it is considered as a more grandeur space. So the proportions, though we take the human in reference, the proportion is made much higher so that you get the grandeur feeling. So that is what you call the proportion. And scale is exactly the actual size of something that you say. You can compare it in terms of the length, the width, the height, that's all a scale that you refer to. Now, human scale, as I said, human scale and human proportion is the best reference, because when we're doing interiors, it is that scale that we consider. Everything around you has to be proportional to the human scale. And that is why we have certain standard measurements for, say, bench height, over cabinet storage and all those kinds of things. So I hope it's clear what is a proportion, how is the proportion worked, and what is the scale. Now, in this one, to show the proportion, actually that was a double height foyer area. And to have that height, so it was about close to 7 meters high. We needed something in that height to be proportional. The chandelier that we wanted had to be proportionate to that height. Of course, it is massive considering a human height. And we picked that chandelier up because it's got a 3-meter drop. Now, if you consider for a standard human being who is about 1.6, say average 1.6, 1.7 meters, 3 meters almost double the size of us. So that is huge in proportion to the human. But within the space, we wanted that ceiling to drop down. We wanted the light to come down so that when you enter, actually, you can see the light even from the bottom. So the bottom almost comes to about 4 meters, 3 point something-ish, so that when you enter the space and look up, you can actually see the light. But when you go on the first floor, you can actually see a drop as well. So the light fitting is proportionate to the height of the hallway. Now, next one here is painting. Now, this is very easily you can understand. You can see the door height. So you can assume what's the human height. And human height, if you consider human scale, you can understand how big. So we had to, cover that large area. So we had one big painting, which is in scale of human scale. And because that comes in line, when you walk across the corridor, this is in line with our vision. So it is even hung in a way that when we visualize it, it is big. It is quite proportionate, but it is in scale with the human scale. So I hope that is, so proportion and scale can be a bit tricky. So I try to explain the best way. Like I said, if you've got questions, always feel free to get back to me. Now, the final one, what you talk about is harmony. Now, when we say harmony, harmony is the end result achieved when all the design elements and the principle interrelate with each other to create a visually appealing space. Now, when you do an interior design, that is why some spaces, when you walk in, you feel completely at ease because it works beautifully. The function has been catered to, and it feels in harmony, and everything seems to be working along with each other. So as you know, you'll probably have an emphasis, you'll have everything else flowing with it, balanced. There will be a rhythm or a repetition within a space, and they all blend together. The proportion and the scale will be correct, and they all blend together, creating that one beautiful feel within a space. Again, the same living room. You can see the different aspects. As I mentioned, you've got the emphasis, you've got the repetition. See the proportion, the couch, because of this being a larger space, the couch and all is in scale, human scale, but slightly bigger. But look about we've got two set of windows, double height. So look at the proportion of the window blinds. We've taken them full length. So they are in proportion to the height of the room. So that is in proportion, and that is in the same proportion as the emphasis created, because that paneling goes to the full height of the space. So you can see each principle actually applies in this space. As I mentioned, when we talk about principles of design, even when you do a small setting, say you're doing a coffee table setting or your console table setting, all these principles actually come into play. And then when they work together and they work well, that is when you get that beautiful effect that you want and you feel at ease. So again, to conclude, balance, proportion, and rhythm in a space bring the elements of the color, pattern, texture, and shape into a functional relationship with the physical aspects of space, light, and structure. So this is to just conclude the whole thing when we talk about the elements of design and the principles of design. This is the conclusion. This is what harmony means. All this will be in relation and worked out perfectly so that they create harmony of spice. That's all for it today. So I don't think I've got anyone joining live because I had kept the extra few minutes for question answer sessions, which I don't think is there today. So thank you, everyone, whoever is watching a replay. As I mentioned, if you've got any questions, please feel free to get back and I'm happy to help. Hope you enjoy creating your own space and let me know. It'd be great if you can even send through a photo of what you've created. I'd love to see that. I have a Facebook page if you'd like to join. It's Latika Nair Design. I'll have it in one of the links as well. Please feel free. It's a space that you can interact, post your questions and ask. Of course, I'm doing videos in there. I discuss few things. I update whatever is needed. And if someone has a question, I make sure I answer them. I want to make it as much interactive as possible. So if anyone of you is interested, please feel free to join my group. I would love to see you there. Have a nice day today. Bye.